Well, hello, listeners and viewers. I am Fred Satilli, and this is the podcast for the Voters Union of Accountability Nation. And I say listeners and viewers because I'm a little in conflict. This is really a podcast, but because I also show it on YouTube, I show things. There's a visual element. And today, before I get started, I have off to the side here, this is my father's flag. My natural father was put on his last patrol in Arlington National Cemetery in 1958, and that's his 48 star flag. And this you can see here. For those of you who can see it, I wish you could see it on the podcast, but you can't. But this is my father's Purple Heart, which he did earn, and there's only one way to earn that. And it's kind of interesting. When I was born, he was in Walter Reed Hospital in a full body cast, and he had to come and visit me. And he came down the hall on two crutches and a full body cast, you know. And of course, I was only an infant, so I have no memory of this, but I think it's a story worth telling. And when he did finally pass away in 1958. A few years later, my mother married Jim Van, my stepfather, a great man in many, many ways. And he became, even though he did not go to college or anything, he became a very high-level executive at Texaco Oil. And he was sent many, many times for long periods of time to South America on projects that to this day, the whole family questions exactly how much was the oil company, how much was the government, the combination of the two. You know, it's an interesting thing. And it's the reason I grew up in Venezuela. And I didn't grow up in Venezuela. It's the reason I did the second grade in Venezuela. He took the whole family down there, and we lived for that time in Puerto La Cruz. And when we came back, they wanted to hold me back in elementary school here because I hadn't legitimately done the second grade. And my stepfather, who he insisted that they give me an IQ test. And at the end of the IQ test, he told the school psychiatrist, you better not hold him back, he's smarter than you. And that's one of those things when you have a stepfather and you're a teenager and you're at odds with your stepfather and the natural rebellion and that kind of thing. You think back, and here he was aggrandizing his stepson in that kind of a way. And of course, they didn't hold me back. And, you know, I was well able to hold my own self back with my antics. But Jim Van did raise me, and he did a real good job of it. And his patriotism penetrated through to me. It's one of the reasons I imagine I'm as patriotic as I am now. So here we are on Memorial Day. It's not really Memorial Day yet. It's the weekend before. It's not May 30th, but you know they move the holidays to the weekend for business reasons. But when I was a teenager, I was a handful, and my father talked to me, and he was my father too. He really was my dad, even though I gave him as hard a time as I could, like many teenagers do with their fathers. So for those of you who can see it, there's my natural father's flag, his Purple Heart medal, and he had very distinguished service as a strategic demolition expert, special forces guy. And my stepfather fought in World War II in a submarine called the Dragonet, and that submarine fought in the Sea of Japan. And later in life, once I was in my 20s, he started telling me those incredible stories, and I respected him as a child, as rebellious as I was. But once I started to hear those stories, he became the hero, of my life. So, anyway, one time when I was probably 14 years old, I made a big issue out of wanting to live my life my way and telling him that I had a right to do that. And he said, well, you do have a lot of rights, but you don't have a right to hedonism. And of course, I didn't know what hedonism meant. And he said, well, you look it up, and then we're going to have a talk. So I did look it up, and I found out that a hedonist is somebody who wants to primarily pursue the pleasure of life, kind of at the cost of all else. And we all know that true satisfaction in life comes from accomplishment and comes from surmounting difficult tasks and proving yourself. So what he was trying to tell me is, cheap thrills is not the way to go, and dedication to hard work and taking responsibility is the true path of happiness. So what I did was I wrote something up, and I didn't want to. Normally, I speak extemporaneously about these things, and I certainly could tell this story, but I really wanted to read off some notes. So I'm going to, and I'll expand, but here we go. So, he said, rights and responsibility are a circle. And a circle is not a disc. It's an edge. It never ends and it never starts. It just goes around and around. There's nothing, whatever may be within the circle is not part of the circle. There's stuff outside of it, something in it, but the circle itself is not a disc. The middle of the circle is not the middle of the disc. There is no middle of the circle. And it's important to understand that. So he began to take me on the trip around the circle, more or less, and he said, your first duty is to God. If you are of that ilk, some people believe in God, and other people believe that we're here as a course of nature. So in this discussion, God and nature are kind of interchangeable, not for everybody. Some people don't believe in God, some people do, and they're sort of not interchangeable. But for the sake of this, he said that God has given you life, or nature has given you life, and there is nothing more precious. So your first duty is to God or to nature, depending on your ilk. Your next duty is to your country. Now, your country protects you from slavery, and most people don't know anything about slavery, and when you're young you don't, and a lot of people have a very short vision of what slavery is, but there are a lot of kinds of slavery, and as you grow older you learn about them, and you learn that your country is supposed to protect you from them. So it's first God and then to your country. And then your next duty is to your community, your state or your county or your actual town, because it provides you with an environment where you can be productive. Okay, you're not in a desert, you're in a town with all the things that are in a town, roads and stores and other people and every kind of resource. This is where you're going to prosper. Your next duty is to your work, to your job, because your job allows you to independently take care of yourself and to take care of others. We exchange in this country with money. It's how we exchange things of value, and your source of money is going to be your job. It's going to be what you trade. Your capital is your labor. Your mind and your hands are your capital, and you trade that for money. So that's your next thing. Your next duty is to your family, because your family provides you with personal emotional security. Once you have your national security and your financial security, your heart needs support, and your family is there and it supports you and you support it. Once again, it's a circle, it's symbiotic. You support your family supports you. Okay, and then if after you've done all those things, you've done your duty in every way, if you have anything left over, time or money, it's all yours. And you can be as hedonistic as you like at that point. Now, I want to add a little addendum here, because when I went over the list of duties to your country, right? Your duty is to your God, to your country, to your community, to your job, to your family, and then finally to yourself. I want to state right here That's where Hitler ended it. He didn't, in Das Boot, I guess it's in Das Boot, there's a guy freaking out because he thinks they're going to die, and the submarine captain says, "We're going to die. We're all going to die. It's our duty to die, but we're not going to die today. So get yourself together and get back to work." So Hitler didn't go all the way around the circle. He just went with the duty part, and all the benefit part wasn't there. Now, by the same token, we had President Kennedy, John Kennedy, and he had his famous quote saying, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." And I looked at that TV, even at that young age, and said, there's something wrong with that. There was something wrong with that. And over the years, I learned what was wrong with that. And he was wrong. It's not ask what you can do for your country. It's what we can do together as an individual and as a nation full of individuals. How can we use the vast resources of this nation to serve my needs, and how can I use my capital, my mind and hands to build and enhance this country to its greater glory? The symbiotic part of this whole thing seemed to be lost on President Kennedy, and it took me quite a long time to figure out what was missing in that. I knew it was wrong at the time. I've had a lifetime of people thinking that was some great quote, but it really wasn't. It was actually very close to what Hitler had communicated to his people, and that's not good. So anyway, let me continue. Now, he said, after you become this kind of a man, God is there for you to always remind you that you are always eternally valuable. What you do matters every minute of every day. That you are here to make, God reminds you, or whatever, that you are here to make a positive difference. The things that you do create ripples across time. There are buildings that my grandfather built. He's been dead for many, many years, maybe 30 years now. People are still living in those buildings, and the plumbing and the carpentry and the air conditioning, refrigeration, everything that went into that he was a part of, that's his legacy to the world. So he has eternal value in that way. And you also find that your country is always there for you. And I've talked about this many times. You have a contract with your country that you can always depend on to protect your rights. And understand this about your country. A lot of people, it seems these days, have a problem being a member of the United States. But let me tell you something. This is my hand. If somebody cuts it off and mails it to somebody in China, they have my hand. It can never become their hand. Your children are your children. If the Department of Social Services takes them away and gives them to another family, the other family has your children. They don't become your children. And it's the same thing with your neighbors. Like in the Bible, it says, love your neighbors. Those are your people. If Martians attack, you and those people are going to bond together in a common cause, right? If the Martians are malignant, or mean or warlike or whatever it may be. And so for everybody, understand that the Canadians have their country, and the British have their country, and the Germans have theirs, and the Chinese have theirs. This is our country. This is, if you're an American and you're watching this, this is your country. You have to love this country and build it as magnificent as any cathedral could ever be, and just the way you build yourself to be as magnificent as you can be. Every man should be his own hero, and every country and every home should be his own castle. It's really important that you understand this. The community will always be there for you. As I said before, you're there for the community to help work on the community, and it's there for you to provide those things that you're going to need. You'll always be able to find a place to work because your skills and your ethics are valuable. and you will always be able to go home to your family where you can give love, which is your nature, and you can receive love, which is your need. Then, just like in the beginning of the circle with the story, if there's any time left for you after you've appreciated all those things, you will be able to enjoy your time alone because you're a made man. You're a success. You've done your duty. You've taken care of others, and you've found a place in your home and in your community and in your country where you're held in value. It's a beautiful thing beyond all measure to be someone like that. Your country appreciates a good man, and as you provide for yourself, it provides for you. It provides security, and these things, you have to take these things into context. It provides security that you'll always be able to worship the way you please. Now, this was really important because the founders of our country came from England, and then that country had a national religion, and you had to be part of that religion to really be a citizen there. And here, you don't have to do that. The government doesn't create its own religion. It leaves that up to your choice and your judgment. And you're also free to speak your ideas. If you have an idea on how to make things better, or if you're trying to point out something that's not good and you want that addressed, you have every right to discuss that in an intellectual conversation and to demonstrate your feelings, right? And that's really important. It allows you to assemble in a large group. You know, some of these totalitarian nations, they don't like more than 3 people getting together because they know it's the beginning of an angry mob and they have something to fear, so they don't allow groups to form. But here, you can get a stadium full of people, and some of these performers do. They'll get 50, 80,000 people and scream some message out to them from the stage, and they have every right to do that. And your government protects your right to protect yourself. You know, when you're being attacked either by an insect or a bear or a mugger or an army from another country, you have a God-given right to try to stay alive. And the government is there to make sure that that right's not infringed upon. You're allowed to have weapons and gates and walls and whatever you need to fortify yourself against assault, you know, and protect yourself and your loved ones and your property. And your property is a real big deal part of that too, right? Because there's a lot of illegal search and seizure, even in this country, which is illegal. But that's a rule of law and rule of permission, something we discussed in another video. But the most important thing it protects is your right to be all you can be. Whether you want to be a concert violinist or a nuclear physicist, whether you want to be a great drummer or be a real great employee at a grocery store. At the time he talked to me, I played the drums and I worked in the grocery store, and he said, you want to play the drums as well as you can, and when you go to work at the grocery store, you do the best job you can, Fred. You know? So you have the capacity here in our country to strive for your dream. In the country where the founding fathers came from, you were born into a strata, and you were never allowed to get out of that strata. So if you were born as a laborer, you were going to probably be a laborer. If you were born in a family of doctors, you would probably grow up to be a doctor. If you were born in the political family, you would grow up to be a politician. It was very hard to change strata. So our deal with our government is they protect you from discrimination against race, class, and gender. Now, the really great report on that is that right now we have men and women, and there was a time when not many women went to college and not many women worked outside the home. And now, the majority of college students are women. And women are allowed to work outside of the home in absolutely any capacity. So the gender issue has been solved. We still have the slavery problem, but the gender issue has been solved. The class issue I spoke about a moment ago, where you can be born in a totally poor environment, and you can grow up and you can become the top of any field. You can become a brilliant scientist or a brilliant politician or a brilliant doctor. It's quite incredible. The possibility, it's entirely up to your initiative. And the race situation, once again, has been totally smashed here, because this country was founded by white Europeans, and white European men were the founders of this country. And right now, the Asians who have come here, who have immigrated here, they're a giant majority in schools, they're a giant majority in businesses, they're extremely successful people. Their race didn't hold them back. When they begin to come here in 1840, 1850, and 1860, they came here as what they called coolie labor. It's a term from India. It means the lowest of low-class people who are not much more than slaves, considered expendable waste, that just you wouldn't have to take care of them, no medical care, not good food, whatever. They just worked themselves to death. That's how that race of people started here, and they've come to dominate everywhere. They're absolutely incredible people, and they worked hard, and they've earned everything they have. So the government has really almost unlimited resources. You can be completely poor and join the United States Army. You know what he told me? I liked cars, and I didn't have a car yet at that time. I was saving up for a car. I wanted a nice car, and he said, "Fred, you want a nice car? You want to drive around in a car? You want to drive an expensive car or whatever?" He said, "You join the Army, and in a year or two, you could be driving a tank. You drive a $50 million tank." He said, "You can drive equipment that you can't even imagine. Never mind these Fords and Chevys and the that kind of stuff." He said, the resources in the military, he said, "You like hot rods?" At the time, there was a Top Fuel funny car that was driven by Don the Snake Prudhomme, and on the back it said Army, because it was supported by the United States Army. So he said, "You want to be a hot rodder? The Ultimate Hot Rodder is sponsored by the Army, and you can do that." So the government can provide something like that. So basically, if you give it everything you got, they'll give you everything you can get. And he says, you want to change the world? You want to write that song, invent that machine, win that election? You have the right to do it. You do not have the right to whine. It's not productive, and it's babyish. It's not all about you, Fred. You see yourself as an independent organism, but in reality, you are a part of a much larger organism. It's all about the symbiotic nature of life. The sooner you realize that, the sooner you will prosper. And then he said, "So is it really so much to ask for you to go out now and cut the lawn?"